You've seen them in Mindhunter, twisted, calculated, terrifying. But how much do you really know about the real killers behind the show? Today, we go deeper than ever before. Not just their crimes, but their darkest thoughts, their psychological profiles, and the FBI's methods to hunt them down. These are details you won't find on other channels. Some of these minds were disturbingly intelligent, others completely unhinged. Let's step into the minds of the world's most notorious serial killers. But be warned, what you're about to hear is as real as it gets. Ed Kemper, the co-ed killer. Our journey into the darkest corners of the human mind begins with Edmund Kemper, the so-called co-ed killer. Towering at 6 feet 9 inches with a genius-level IQ, Kemper was far from the stereotypical image of a mindless killer. But behind his soft-spoken demeanor lurked a man capable of unspeakable horrors. Between 1964 and 1973, Kemper brutally murdered 10 people, including his own mother.
On men for much of my upbringing. My mother was a sick, angry, hungry, and very sad woman. I hated her, but I wanted to love my mother. And I watched the alcohol increase. I watched her social life drop off. I watched her get bizarre. She had terrible pain from her life.
His crimes weren't just about killing, they were about control. He didn't just take lives, he defiled them, dismembering his victims, engaging in necrophilia, and keeping body parts as trophies. He displayed a level of depravity that even seasoned FBI profilers struggled to comprehend. But what turned him into a monster? Psychologists believe his deep-seated hatred for his mother fueled his violent urges. She belittled him, controlled him, and made him feel powerless his entire life. And when he finally snapped, he made sure she was his final victim. In a twisted act of revenge, he decapitated her, placed her severed head on a shelf, and, according to his own confession, screamed at it for hours. Ed Kemper wasn't just a killer. He was a predator who played mind games, not just with his victims, but with the very people who tried to study him. Even after his arrest, he willingly spoke to the FBI, offering chilling insights into his own psyche. His interviews would later become the foundation for modern criminal profiling. But Kemper was only the beginning. Our next killer had a very different story, and an equally disturbing mind. Monte Rissell. Not all serial killers are seasoned criminals. Some begin their reign of terror at an alarmingly young age. Monte Rissell was only a teenager when he committed his first murder, but by the time he was caught at just 19, he had already claimed the lives of 5 women. Unlike many serial killers who evade justice for years, Rissell spiraled out of control quickly. His violent tendencies surfaced early, starting with acts of petty crime, then escalating to sexual assault. He was arrested multiple times for rape, but each time he found a way to slip through the cracks of the system. His victims paid the ultimate price. Psychologists diagnosed him with antisocial personality disorder, meaning he lacked empathy, remorse, or the ability to control his violent impulses. But was he born this way? Or was he made? Many believe his early exposure to trauma and rejection pushed him down this path. Every time he felt powerless, he lashed out, escalating from sexual violence to cold-blooded murder. Unlike more methodical killers, Rissell didn't carefully plan his crimes. He acted on impulse, seizing opportunities whenever they presented themselves. And that's what made him so dangerous. Unpredictable, chaotic, a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. But what made the FBI take notice of Rissell wasn't just his crimes. It was his mind. He later became one of the real-life case studies that helped shape criminal profiling. And the way he described his killings? Chillingly casual, as if he were talking about everyday events. But Rissell was far from the only killer with a disturbing detachment from reality. Our next predator had a much darker and stranger obsession. Jerry Brudos, the shoe fetish slayer. Some serial killers are driven by rage, others by control. But Jerry Brudos, his obsession was something else entirely. Known as the shoe fetish slayer, Brudos didn't just kill, he collected. From an early age, Brudos exhibited disturbing tendencies. As a child, he stole women's shoes, hiding them like prized possessions. But as he grew older, his fetish escalated into something far more sinister. He didn't just want the shoes anymore. He wanted the women wearing them. Brudos lured his victims into his basement, a twisted chamber of horrors where he carried out his depraved fantasies. After murdering them, he didn't simply dispose of the bodies. He kept trophies, pieces of his victims, frozen in time. A macabre collection that fed his insatiable desires. Psychologists diagnosed him with fetishistic disorder and sadism. To him, women weren't people. They were objects, accessories to be owned and controlled. His crimes weren't just about killing. They were about possession, ultimate domination. Brudos was cunning but not careful. It was his arrogance, his belief that he was untouchable, that led to his capture. And when the FBI studied his case, they saw a pattern that would repeat in many killers to come. The chilling blend of sexual deviance and cold-blooded murder. But Brudos was not the only one whose twisted fantasies turned deadly. Our next killer carried out one of the most infamous mass murders in American history, one that left an entire nation in shock. Richard Speck, the man who brought terror in a single night. July 13th, 1966, a quiet dormitory in Chicago. 8 young nurses, full of life and dreams, had no idea that this night would be their last, because Richard Speck had just stepped through their door. Speck wasn't a serial killer in the traditional sense. He didn't stalk his victims for months or play a long, twisted game. No. His was a crime of pure rage. Fueled by alcohol, misogyny, and uncontrollable violence, he turned one ordinary night into an unspeakable horror. One by one, he bound and brutalized the terrified nurses, killing them methodically, making sure none escaped. The massacre shocked the world. How could a single man subdue and execute 8 victims in a single night? The answer lay in his past. Speck was no stranger to violence. An unstable childhood, a history of petty crime, and an addiction to alcohol had shaped him into a ticking time bomb. Diagnosed with psychopathy and extreme impulse control issues, he lacked remorse, empathy, or even logic. His hatred for women turned into an uncontrollable need to destroy. But Speck wasn't a mastermind. He left behind a survivor, a woman who hid under a bed and lived to tell the world what happened. Thanks to her testimony, he was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. In the eyes of the FBI, Richard Speck wasn't an organized killer. He was impulsive, reckless, a man whose boiling rage finally spilled over into mass murder. His case became a textbook example of how unchecked violence, when mixed with addiction and deep-seated misogyny, can erupt in ways no one sees coming. But while Speck acted in a blind frenzy, our next killer had a different approach. One that involved careful planning, manipulation, and a twisted need for recognition. David Berkowitz, son of Sam. New York City, the summer of 1976. The city is gripped by fear. A faceless gunman prowls the streets, striking at random. His victims? Young couples, caught off guard in parked cars. His calling card? A chilling letter, signed, Son of Sam. David Berkowitz wasn't just another killer. He was a phantom in the night, terrorizing an entire city with no apparent pattern. He claimed a demon possessed his neighbor's dog, forcing him to kill. But was this really the truth? Or was it a carefully crafted lie? Berkowitz displayed clear signs of paranoid delusions, possibly schizophrenia. He truly seemed to believe that supernatural forces were guiding him. But there was something else at play, his hunger for attention. He didn't just kill, he wanted to be seen. He taunted the police, left cryptic messages, and watched as the media turned him into a legend. The more fear he created, the more powerful he felt. But for all his theatrics, Berkowitz made one mistake: he got sloppy. A parking ticket near one of the crime scenes led police straight to his door. When they arrested him, he confessed immediately, almost as if he had been waiting for the moment. In the FBI's eyes, Berkowitz was the perfect example of a disorganized killer. He didn't have the cold, calculated mind of a Kemper or a Rader. Instead, he acted impulsively, driven by delusions and a desperate need for recognition. Even behind bars, he continued to seek the spotlight, fueling theories about whether he had been truly insane or just playing the part. But while Berkowitz craved attention, our next killer had a different obsession, one that was far more disturbing. Elmer Wayne Henley, the boy who became a monster. What turns a boy into a killer? Is it fear, manipulation, or something far darker? Elmer Wayne Henley was just a teenager when he met Dean Corll, a man who seemed charming on the surface. But beneath that facade lurked a sadistic predator. Corll had already lured young boys to their deaths, but he needed an accomplice, someone he could control. And Henley was the perfect candidate. At first, Henley believed he was only helping Corll recruit runaways, nothing more. But soon, the truth unraveled. Corll wasn't just taking in boys, he was torturing them, killing them, and Henley was in too deep to escape. What would you do? Run? Call the police? Henley did neither. Instead, he stayed. And worse, he participated. Was he a victim himself? Or a willing executioner? The FBI would later categorize Henley as someone who suffered from moral disengagement. He had convinced himself that his actions weren't his fault. He was just following orders, just trying to survive. But is survival an excuse for evil? Eventually, Henley reached his breaking point. The horror, the violence. It was too much. One night, in a shocking twist, he turned the gun on his master. He shot Corll dead, ending the killing spree once and for all. But does that make him a hero? Or was it just a desperate act of self-preservation? To this day, Henley remains behind bars. Some see him as a victim of Corll's manipulation. Others believe he was a monster in his own right. The truth is never that simple. But if you thought Henley was a product of manipulation, our next killer had no one to blame but himself. William Pierce Jr., the mindless killer. Some killers are calculated, methodical, almost impossible to catch. And then, there are those like William Pierce Jr., men who kill not out of strategy, but out of sheer impulse. A drifter, a thief, and eventually, a murderer. Pierce didn't have a master plan. He didn't stalk his victims for weeks or orchestrate elaborate crimes. He killed simply because he could. Over the course of a brutal killing spree, Pierce took at least 9 lives. His victims? Random. Strangers who crossed his path at the wrong time. But what made him especially dangerous was his complete lack of control. Unlike some serial killers who manipulate and deceive, Pierce wasn't cunning. He was reckless. The FBI would later describe him as having low intelligence and extreme impulsivity. He didn't outsmart the police. He simply left chaos in his wake, until his luck ran out. It wasn't advanced detective work that caught him. Pierce was sloppy, a repeat offender with a violent streak. He left behind too many clues, too many witnesses. And when he was finally arrested, there was no brilliant last stand, no elaborate confession, just a man with no remorse, no control, and no future. William Pierce Jr. wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a human time bomb, one that exploded again and again until there was nothing left but destruction. William Henry Hance, the delusional deceiver. Some killers try to disappear into the shadows. And then, there are those who think they're clever enough to rewrite reality. William Henry Hance was one of them. A man who not only took lives, but tried to manipulate the world into believing in a killer cult that never existed. His crimes were brutal. Multiple women murdered. Their lives stolen by a man who thought he was smarter than everyone else. But Hance wasn't a mastermind. In fact, his downfall came from his very own deception. In a desperate attempt to mislead investigators, he fabricated an imaginary group called the Forces of Evil, claiming they were responsible for the murders. Ransom-style letters, cryptic messages. It was all an elaborate smokescreen. But there was one problem. The story didn't hold up. Hance's mind was disorganized, his thinking erratic. Unlike truly cunning killers, he wasn't calculated. He was scrambling. The FBI quickly saw through the inconsistencies in his narrative. His deception wasn't genius. It was desperate. It didn't take long for the lies to unravel, and when they did, Hance wasn't facing the world as a criminal mastermind. He was exposed as a confused, reckless killer with nowhere left to hide. William Henry Hance thought he could outsmart the system. Instead, he became yet another case study in the dangers of disorganized thinking. Paul Bateson, the killer in the shadows. Some killers hide in plain sight, blending into their surroundings, unnoticed, until it's too late. Paul Bateson was one of them. A man with a seemingly ordinary life, a social presence, even a minor Hollywood connection. But beneath it all, lurked something far darker. Bateson was convicted of a single murder, a brutal killing that exposed his sadistic tendencies. But rumors whispered of something much more sinister. Dismembered bodies found in the East River, unsolved cases, and a chilling theory that he was responsible for far more deaths than the courts could prove. Psychologists noted his narcissistic traits, his eerie lack of remorse. He enjoyed attention, but more than that, he enjoyed power. A man who may have gotten away with far more than the world will ever know. Was he a one-time killer, or a serial predator lurking beneath the surface? The truth remains a mystery. But if there's one thing we do know, it's that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones we never see coming.
you look at his lifestyle, I mean, he really didn't fit the profile of a serial killer. I mean, he blended in. You know, the president of his church congregation, Boy Scout leader, you know, lived in the suburbs outside of Wichita. I mean, he blended in.
Dennis Rader, BTK Killer. He called himself BTK, bind, torture, kill. A name that wasn't just a signature, but a promise. For decades, Dennis Rader terrorized Wichita, Kansas, stalking his victims, breaking into their homes, and carrying out his methodical, sadistic rituals. He didn't just want to kill. He wanted to control, to own his victims in their final, helpless moments. But Rader wasn't just another faceless monster. He was a family man, a church leader, a seemingly ordinary citizen who lived a double life. His crimes were fueled by an obsessive need for dominance and a hunger for recognition.
We could tell that it was somehow affiliated with Christ Lutheran Church and the Park City Community Public Library. And then the next thing we looked at was statistics, and it shows here that was last saved by Dennis. So somehow a Dennis who was affiliated with the church or the library was somehow involved with this document.
And that would be his downfall. His letters to the police, his arrogant taunts, his belief that he was untouchable, all led to a single mistake, a digital trace, a moment of carelessness that finally unmasked the monster hiding behind the mask of normalcy. Rader craved control, but in the end, it was his own ego that sealed his fate. Charles Tex Watson, the Manson family's executioner. August 9th, 1969. A quiet night in Los Angeles, shattered by unimaginable horror. Leading the charge was Charles Tex Watson, the man who carried out Charles Manson's blood-soaked vision. He wasn't the mastermind, but he was the executioner, the enforcer, the one who transformed Manson's apocalyptic fantasies into brutal reality. Watson wasn't born a killer. He was once a high school athlete, a church-going boy from Texas. But under Manson's spell, he became something else. Something unrecognizable. His extreme suggestibility, his desperate need for approval, made him the perfect pawn. And when the moment came to kill, he didn't hesitate. 7 victims, slaughtered with unimaginable cruelty, not for money, not for revenge, but for a delusion, a fantasy whispered into his ear by a madman. And yet, when the Manson family fell, when the trial began, Tex Watson turned to something new. Religion. Repentance. A different kind of obedience. But can redemption ever erase the horror of what he did? That is the question that lingers. Herbert Mullin, the killer who feared earthquakes. Most serial killers kill for pleasure, power, or control. But Herbert Mullin? He believed he was saving lives. 13 victims, strangers, innocent people, chosen at random. In his mind, each killing was a sacrifice, a necessary act to appease the earth and prevent catastrophic earthquakes. To him, murder wasn't evil. It was a duty. Paranoid schizophrenia, delusions, auditory hallucinations. Mullin wasn't in control of his mind. He was at the mercy of it. He heard voices telling him to kill, and he obeyed. The world saw him as a monster, but in his own twisted reality, he was a savior. Unlike most serial killers, Mullin wasn't cunning. He wasn't methodical. He was chaotic, reckless. His crimes were scattered, impulsive. And that's what led to his downfall. A simple traffic stop, a routine encounter, and just like that, his deadly mission was over. But here's the question. If he had received help sooner, if his mental illness had been treated, would those 13 people still be alive? Wayne Williams, the suspect behind the Atlanta child murders. For nearly 2 years, Atlanta was gripped by terror. Dozens of children vanishing. Their bodies turning up days, sometimes weeks later. The city was desperate for answers, and law enforcement was under immense pressure. Then, they found their suspect, Wayne Williams. Williams was young, confident, and intelligent, but he was also arrogant. When police set up surveillance on Atlanta's bridges, waiting for the killer to dispose of another body, Williams drove right into their trap, a loud splash in the river, and moments later, a routine traffic stop that changed everything. Fibers, hair strands, tiny, almost invisible traces that linked him to multiple victims. The science was damning. Yet Williams never confessed. To this day, he insists he's innocent, claiming he was framed. But the FBI's behavioral analysis painted a different picture. A narcissist, a manipulator, a man who craved power and control. Wayne Williams was convicted of 2 murders, but the question remains, was he truly the man behind the Atlanta child murders? Or was the real killer never caught? Common psychological patterns in these criminals: lack of empathy and remorse, high intelligence or cunning manipulation, childhood trauma or abusive backgrounds, control and dominance tendencies, sadistic pleasure in inflicting pain, childhood abuse and neglect like Rissell, Brudos, and Henley, cult influence and indoctrination like Watson and Henley, psychopathy and lack of empathy such as Rader, Brudos, and Rissell, schizophrenia and delusions like Mullin and Berkowitz, narcissism and control fixation like Rader and Kemper, impulsivity and low IQ like Pierce and Hance. FBI profiling of Mindhunter serial killers. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit, BSU, pioneered modern criminal profiling by studying serial offenders. The real-life profilers, John E. Douglas, Robert Ressler, and Roy Hazelwood, conducted in-depth interviews with convicted killers to develop behavior-based predictive models. The FBI classifies serial killers as either organized or disorganized. Many of the Mindhunter criminals, like Rader and Kemper, were highly organized, methodical, and calculated in their killings. Others, like Mullin and Hance, were disorganized, leaving behind chaotic crime scenes. Key psychological patterns FBI discovered. Narcissistic killers, Dennis Rader, BTK, and Ed Kemper wanted recognition and sent letters, wanted to outsmart law enforcement. Sexual deviants, Jerry Brudos and Monte Rissell used murder as sexual domination and kept trophies or relived crimes through memories. Psychotic versus psychopathic killers. Psychotic, like Mullin. Delusional, heard voices. Psychopathic, like Kemper, Rader, and Brudos. Calculating, manipulative, no remorse. What Mindhunter teaches us about criminal psychology. Not all killers are the same. Some are psychopathic like Rader, some delusional like Berkowitz, while others are purely impulsive like Speck. Childhood trauma is a key risk factor, but not all abused children become criminals. Power and control are common motivations, whether it's a need for dominance, as for Kemper and Rader, or validation, like Manson. Not all serial killers are insane. Many, like BTK and Kemper, are highly intelligent and methodical. Psychological manipulation is a major factor, whether from cults, like Watson, dominant killers, such as Henley, or internal delusions as Mullin. High-functioning killers are the hardest to catch. Organized predators like BTK and Boston Strangler evaded capture for years. Mindhunter provides a realistic depiction of forensic psychology, showing that criminal profiling is not about reading minds, but analyzing behavioral patterns. Understanding the psychology of serial killers is not just about morbid curiosity. It's about learning how law enforcement tracks, profiles, and ultimately stops these predators. The terrifying truth? There are more out there. Studying their minds is the key to catching them before they strike again. In upcoming episodes, we'll take a deep dive into each of these killers' minds, their crimes, and what truly drove them to kill. Subscribe to Dark Corridor for more true crime analysis and psychological breakdowns of the world's most twisted minds. Thanks for watching. And remember, the corridors of the human mind are darker than you think.